Das letzte Lachen eines Sterbenden verbirgt ein mörderisches Geheimnis. Willkommen bei Grey Whispers, ich bin euer Gastgeber, Everton. Hinterlasse einen Kommentar und teile mit, von wo auf der Welt ihr zuschaut. Eure Stimmen erwecken dieses Mysterium wahrhaftig zum Leben. Lasst uns beginnen.
It was the kind of grey, brooding morning that seemed to muffle the clatter of hansom cabs and made the gaslights flicker in protest against the damp. I had just settled into my armchair with a fresh edition of the Times and a second cup of tea when Holmes, who had been unusually silent all morning, abruptly cast aside the volume of Euripides he had been perusing and strode to the window with agitation. "There is something distinctly wrong with the quality of this fog, Watson," he muttered, drawing a long breath through his nose. "It lacks the integrity of a true London miasma. This is the kind of half-hearted murk that precedes bad news." Before I could offer a remark on either the meteorological or psychological implications of his comment, the doorbell rang, sharp and urgent. Mrs. Hudson showed in a short, plump man wearing a thick black overcoat, a crumpled bowler hat clasped nervously in his hands. His eyes, red-rimmed and sunken, darted around the sitting room with the manner of one who expected horror to leap from every corner. I beg your pardon, Mr. Holmes," he said in a strained whisper. "But I've nowhere else to go. They'll say it was the fever talking, but I swear to you, the clown spoke to me after he died." Holmes's expression sharpened instantly, and he motioned for the man to sit. "Begin at the beginning, Mr. Henry Peebles. I'm the assistant stage manager for the Harlequin and Gaslight Music Hall, down in Clerkenwell." "Indeed. And the clown in question?" "Jasper Meeks, sir. Jasper the Jolly. He's been making the crowds laugh since before I could read a playbill. He passed away last night. A bad turn with his lungs, they said. He'd been coughing up spots of blood for weeks but refused to see a doctor. Always said his makeup looked better than any medicine." I could see Holmes's brow furrow in interest. "And what precisely did he say to you after his death?" Peebles twisted the hat in his hands until it threatened to disintegrate. "It was just after 10. We'd finished the last performance and I went backstage to check on Jasper. He was in his little dressing room, the one with the cracked mirror and the ivory-handled brush. I found him slumped over, cold as a slab of ice. But just as I leaned in to close his eyes, his lips moved. I swear it. He whispered, 'Tell Holmes, the joke's gone too far. It's all in the final jest.' Then nothing. Dead as the gaslights when the bills aren't paid." I instinctively glanced at Holmes, expecting skepticism, but he remained motionless, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Interesting," he said finally. "You've told no one else?" I may have mentioned it to Polly, one of the chorus girls, but she said I'd lost my senses. No one else would listen. They think I'm cracked. That's why I came here." Holmes turned away and stared at the fogged windowpane. "Clowns, Watson," he murmured, "are figures of paradox. Joy and melancholy, masks hiding grief, jests concealing truths, a message spoken in death, buried within the framework of a jest. This is not the rambling of madness, but the architecture of deliberate intent." I stirred uncomfortably. "You believe this Meeks was murdered?" "That is precisely what we shall determine. Mr. Peebles, you are to return to the music hall and behave as though nothing has transpired. I will call upon you this evening, accompanied by my colleague, Dr. Watson." Peebles rose, looking both relieved and terrified. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I don't care if the world says I'm mad. I know what I heard." When he had gone, Holmes fetched his violin and began to saw away at a dark, contemplative adagio. "There's mischief afoot, Watson," he said between phrases. "And murder does so love a disguise. A clown's deathbed whisper may be no laughing matter. This case, I fear, will test not only our deduction but our imagination." And with that, the dying notes of the violin were swallowed by the ever-thickening fog, as though the very air outside anticipated something dreadful. Our departure for Clerkenwell was delayed by little more than the time it took Holmes to brush the ash from his dressing gown and exchange it for a lean-cut overcoat of Inverness tweed. He moved with quiet energy, that peculiar hum of intensity which meant his mind was already unraveling threads not yet visible to the eye. I, having long ago resigned myself to being swept along in such currents, fetched my medical bag out of habit and followed him down the stairs. The fog had thickened into a clinging damp that muffled the rattle of carriage wheels as we made our way through the winding arteries of London. Holmes was uncharacteristically silent during the journey, though his fingers drummed restlessly against the seat's worn leather. "The dying often speak nonsense," I offered at length. "Delirium, fractured memory, disordered senses. There's no shortage of medical explanations." He turned his gaze on me with something close to indulgence. "Quite so, Watson." But the man did not simply cry out or mutter an incoherent farewell. He spoke with intent, offering a name, my name no less, and a phrase that bears the distinct structure of design. "The joke's gone too far." Even the second clause, "It's all in the final jest," suggests there is more beneath the surface. No, this was not the drift of fever. It was a cipher in theatrical language. We arrived at the Harlequin and Gaslight to find it dim and echoing, the grand facade giving way to the more workmanlike clutter of a backstage world. Peebles, looking paler than he had that morning, met us at the side entrance and led us along a narrow corridor whose walls were hung with curling posters and fading caricatures, grotesque visages frozen in laughter or exaggerated surprise. "Jasper's dressing room is just through here," he murmured, nodding toward a warped door with a brass number 5 screwed crookedly into the wood. "No one's touched anything. I made sure of it." Holmes motioned for silence and stepped inside. The space was small, thick with the stale scent of grease paint, spirit gum, and stale tobacco. A cluttered vanity sat beneath the cracked mirror Peebles had mentioned, its surface a mosaic of colored pots and brushes. A costume of patchwork silk, gaudy in daylight, pitiful in death, hung limply on a coat hook. Holmes moved slowly, deliberately, gliding between objects with the air of a sommelier examining vintage. He crouched by the overturned stool, ran a gloved finger along the edge of a chipped enamel basin, and peered behind a faded curtain concealing a cramped washroom. Then he paused. "Watson." I approached, and he gestured to the dressing table. "Observe the ivory-handled brush." I leaned in. It was there, sitting neatly aligned among the clutter, its surface polished from frequent use. "Nothing extraordinary," I said. "Precisely. In a room so chaotic, this item alone retains perfect symmetry. Too perfect." He reached forward, delicately pried it from its resting place, and held it up to the light. From within the hollow of the handle, a tiny curl of folded paper protruded. With tweezers drawn from his coat, he teased it free. We both leaned closer as he unfolded it. There were only 3 words, printed in block letters with a faint smear of grease paint across the lower corner. "Punchline comes tonight." Holmes exhaled through his nose. It seems our clown intended one final act. Peebles, who had hovered just outside the doorway, now stepped inside cautiously. "Dear God, you mean he knew something was going to happen?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Quite the opposite. I suspect he planned it." He turned to the manager. "Mr. Peebles, did Jasper perform last night as usual?" "Yes, sir. He did the closing routine, a piece he wrote himself called The Melancholy Meal. It's one of his darker sketches, though the crowd loves it. He eats a whole invisible dinner in silence while a hidden violin plays an off-key waltz. Finishes with a toast to everything we pretend to enjoy. Got a standing ovation." "Was he alone on stage?" "Entirely." Holmes nodded to himself. Then he arranged for an audience to witness his final message. "It is not death that troubles me here, Watson, but the way he used it." Before I could speak, there was a sudden sound from the hallway, a sharp intake of breath. Holmes was there in 2 long strides. He flung the door open to reveal a young woman in a shimmering green rehearsal dress, her face ghost white. "Polly Weston," Peebles said, stepping forward. "One of our chorus girls." I wasn't eavesdropping," she said quickly. "But I heard you mention Jasper." I think someone's been in his dressing room since this morning. Holmes's gaze sharpened. What makes you say that? She hesitated. Because that little brass clown head, the one he kept by the mirror, it's missing. He called it his totem. Said it was the only thing that kept the darkness away. Holmes looked back into the room. She's right. There's a faint circle of dust where it's Saturday. Was it valuable? I asked. Sentimentally, Polly whispered. He used to speak to it, especially when he was nervous. He said it never laughed at the wrong time. Holmes's expression darkened. That totem may be more than a memento. Peebles, is there a list of everyone who came and went last night after the performance? I can compile one, he said. You think someone took it? I think someone wanted something Jasper left behind, Holmes replied, already stepping past us into the corridor. And if I am not very much mistaken, they will return again tonight for the punchline. Holmes, I said, keeping pace beside him. Do you truly believe Meeks orchestrated this as part of some theatrical message? Why not simply write a letter or confide in someone he trusted? Holmes halted and gave me a sharp look. Because, Watson, we are not dealing with a man of conventional means. Jasper Meeks lived for the stage. He trusted the performance. Its rhythm, its illusion, its power to mask and reveal. And if his death was indeed the final jest, then we must attend the performance, lest the joke claim another victim. He turned to Peebles. Mr. Peebles, secure 2 tickets for tonight's show. Place Dr. Watson and myself discreetly at the back of the house. And one final request. Do not alter the order of the program. Let everything proceed exactly as it did yesterday. Peebles nodded, visibly rattled. As you wish, Mr. Holmes. Though I can't see what good it will do. Holmes smiled faintly. You underestimate the potency of theater, Mr. Peebles. The stage may hide the truth, but it also forces its players to follow a script. And tonight, someone will forget their lines. He turned and walked toward the exit with purposeful stride, the fog outside now curling at the threshold like an audience waiting in silence for the curtain to rise. The final jest, it seemed, had only just begun. The evening crowd outside the Harlequin and Gaslight Music Hall was already gathering when Holmes and I arrived, bundled in our coats against the damp wind. A line of patrons, thick with chatter and laughter, stretched beneath the striped canopy that bore the theater's name in peeling gold letters. Lanterns cast flickering halos across the cobbles, and the clink of coins from the ticket booth provided a cheerful counterpoint to the faint trill of a violin warming up within. But Holmes was not here for amusement. His eyes were sharp, ceaselessly scanning the crowd, and he adjusted the brim of his felt hat in a manner I'd come to associate with deep concentration. He nodded curtly at Peebles, who met us at the stage entrance and ushered us into the gallery through a side passage. I placed you in the back corner as instructed, Peebles whispered, motioning toward 2 modest wooden seats. No one will notice you there. And I told the staff to keep out of Jasper's dressing room until after the show. Very good, Holmes replied. And the missing totem? Still unaccounted for. Holmes nodded once and said no more. The music hall inside was a curious blend of faded grandeur and makeshift charm. Velvet curtains, once a regal crimson, now sagged in dusty folds above the stage, and the carved box seats bore the marks of countless fingertips and cigarette burns. A quartet was tuning up in the orchestra pit, their notes floating uncertainly into the rafters. As the audience filtered in, shopkeepers, clerks, young couples out for an evening's diversion, Holmes watched each one with unblinking interest. At one point, his gaze lingered on a man in a herringbone coat seated alone beneath a balcony pillar. The man's face was long and colorless, his eyes darting nervously. Holmes filed him away with the same expression he might reserve for an unfamiliar footprint in the mud. The lights dimmed, and the performance began with a comic juggler and a pair of singing sisters, their harmonies slightly out of tune. Holmes gave them no more attention than he might have given raindrops on a windowpane. His focus was elsewhere, on the movement of the ushers, the arrangement of the lighting, the precise moment at which a stagehand ducked behind the curtain. At last, the stage darkened entirely, and a solitary spotlight glowed in the center. A hush fell over the audience. A lone violin began to play a haunting, discordant waltz. "This is it," Holmes whispered. "Watch closely." From the side of the stage, a figure emerged. A man in patchwork costume, his face painted in elaborate monochrome. One half smiling, the other weeping. It was Jasper the Jolly, or rather, someone impersonating him. My breath caught. It was uncanny. His gait, his flourishes, even the hesitant bow to the audience. It was all Meeks, brought back to life. The clown sat at an invisible table and mimed the act of eating a full meal. The audience chuckled softly at first, unsure, then laughed more freely as he gestured exaggeratedly toward an invisible plate and delicately chewed on nothing at all. Yet a strange tension underlay the scene, and Holmes was motionless, his fingers curled over the arm of his seat. "He's changed the pacing," Holmes murmured. "It's too swift. He's nervous." The routine progressed. At last, the clown stood and raised an imaginary glass. He turned to the crowd, held his pose, and suddenly, a loud crack rang out. A scream burst from the audience. The clown dropped, collapsing sideways like a marionette with its strings cut. For a moment, the entire theater was frozen. Then the orchestra struck a discordant note. Someone cried out again, and the curtain swayed violently as backstage staff rushed forward. Holmes was already moving.
"Come, Watson?"
We reached the wings just as Peebles arrived, his face ashen. "It's not part of the act," he gasped. "That was real. He's dead." Holmes knelt by the fallen figure. The face paint smeared as he lifted the man's chin, and I saw blood pooled beneath the neck ruffle. I crouched beside him, pressing fingers to the throat. "Dead?" I confirmed grimly. "A bullet, clean through the left side. He died almost instantly." Holmes stood, scanning the wings, the rafters above, the narrow passage leading to the fly gallery. "Sniper, likely from the lighting catwalk. Precise. Meant to silence." "Who is he?" I asked. Holmes unmasked the clown, revealing a young man I didn't recognize. "Not Meeks. This is Bernard Quilly, the understudy Peebles mentioned in passing earlier. Jasper's protégé. It appears someone feared he might reveal too much in his reenactment of the sketch." Peebles caught up to us, panting, his shirt damp with sweat. "Bernard! My God! He insisted on performing tonight. He said Jasper would have wanted it." Holmes turned sharply. "Did he tell you why?" "He said Jasper left him instructions, an envelope in the toe of one of his costume boots. It contained the script for tonight's performance, written in Jasper's own hand." "Where is this envelope now?" I have it in my office." "Take us." We hurried through the rear passageways of the theater to Peebles's cramped office. It was lined with playbills, rolls of poster paper, and a dusty Victrola in the corner. Peebles unlocked a desk drawer and handed Holmes a pale blue envelope, the edges creased. Holmes opened it carefully and extracted a folded sheet of parchment. On it, in looping theatrical scrawl, was a full script, not of the sketch as I remembered it, but a variation. At the bottom was a final line. "The man who laughs too loud hides the truth in silence." Holmes studied the phrase for a long moment, then turned it over. On the back, a small inked stamp caught his eye. "The Laughing Club," he muttered. "Watson, do you recall the Society of Eccentric Humorists who used to meet in Lambeth? They held masquerade dinners and referred to themselves as the Laughing Club. Rumor had it they dabbled in more than comedy. Blackmail, coded jokes with dangerous meaning, even threats disguised as limericks." "Yes, vaguely. But they disbanded years ago." "Or went underground," Holmes corrected. "This stamp suggests Meeks had some recent interaction with them." There was a knock at the door. An usher appeared, trembling. "Inspector Lestrade's arrived, sir. Scotland Yard's all over the place." Holmes sighed. "Tell him we'll be with him shortly." As the usher vanished, Holmes turned to me, his voice low and deliberate. "Two dead men now, Watson. One from natural causes, perhaps, and one most certainly not. Both tied to a performance, both sending signals instead of confessions. The stage conceals, but it also reveals. And I believe Jasper Meeks had unearthed something dangerous, hidden in plain sight. He folded the parchment carefully and tucked it into his coat. The final jest is still being written, Watson. And tonight we saw the next act. Lestrade, when we found him in the front lobby of the theater, was already barking orders at 2 constables and speaking over a man attempting to inventory audience witness statements. The inspector looked up as we approached, his mustache bristling with irritation. "I might have known you'd be in the middle of this, Holmes," he said. "Can't so much as hear a shot fired in London these days without expecting to see you nosing about." Holmes offered his usual thin smile. "The stage, Lestrade, is rarely dull, though I confess I had not expected the curtain to fall this swiftly. The man shot was not the original clown, Jasper Meeks, but his understudy, Bernard Quilly. We suspect he was delivering a message meant to provoke." "I've already got the medical examiner en route," Lestrade grunted. "But if you know who the lad was and what he was doing, best to enlighten me quickly." Holmes pulled me slightly aside and lowered his voice. "Lestrade's methods, while admirably direct, are not well suited to subtleties of theater. Let us not burden him with conjecture. Yet. Instead, Holmes stepped forward and addressed the inspector evenly. "Let us proceed by order of cause. Quilly was shot with remarkable precision during his imitation of Meeks's final sketch. That tells us 2 things. 1, that someone in the audience or theater had anticipated his performance would include information dangerous to them. And 2, that the marksman had to be in position beforehand." Lestrade raised an eyebrow. "You're saying this wasn't random?" "I am saying it was arranged before the curtain rose," Holmes replied. "I propose we investigate the catwalk above the stage, the only vantage point with the proper angle and sufficient concealment." I followed Holmes and a reluctant constable up the narrow staircase to the rigging gallery, a maze of wooden planks suspended high above the stage. The air up here was warmer, the theater heat rising with each footfall, and I caught the unmistakable scent of oil and brass polish. Holmes moved quickly, scanning the beams, pulleys, and lanterns. He paused near a section where the boards had been recently disturbed, fine powdery dust displaced by a boot print. He crouched low, examining the edge of the beam. "There," he said softly. "Rope fibers frayed. And here, Watson, smell that." I leaned down and caught the sharp scent of cordite. "Freshly fired," I confirmed. "So the shot came from here." Holmes nodded. "The angle is exact. The marksman must have slipped away down the opposite stair once the lights went black." He stood and gestured for the constable to note the evidence. "Have your men post guards at every exit. I doubt the culprit has lingered, but a thorough check may yet yield something." As we descended, Holmes was silent, his thoughts clearly racing. Back in the lobby, Peebles was speaking to Lestrade, wringing his hands and offering a list of staff members present during both nights. Holmes took the list without comment and scanned it. I saw his eyes linger briefly on one name before folding the paper into his pocket. "The chorus girl," Holmes said suddenly, turning to me. "Polly Weston. I'd like another word with her." We found Polly sitting alone in the wings, her green costume replaced by a long gray cloak. She looked up quickly, eyes still rimmed with smudged coal. "You were right," she whispered. "They killed him. I knew Bernard was frightened. He said Jasper had uncovered something, but I didn't think it would come to this." "What exactly did Bernard tell you?" Holmes asked gently. Polly hesitated, then reached into her cloak and pulled out a small notebook. "He gave me this yesterday. Told me not to read it unless something happened to him. I haven't looked yet." Holmes took it carefully and flipped through the first few pages. His expression remained unreadable. "Watson," he said, handing me the book. "Your thoughts?" I opened it to the middle and saw rows of names, dates, locations. Some matched music halls in London, others I did not recognize. Alongside several entries were cryptic notations: 2 visits, rehearsed laugh, Glass bottle hidden. It seemed more like surveillance than a diary. What was Bernard doing with this? I asked Polly. He said Jasper had been making a study of someone, maybe more than one person. People in the theater world, in the clubs. He called them the audience behind the curtain. Said there were things happening off stage that were far darker than anything in the spotlight. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Fascinating. That aligns with our earlier lead, the Laughing Club. Polly frowned. I've heard of them. Jasper used to joke about it. Said some of the best jokes were actually warnings, and some audiences laughed to keep from noticing the truth. Holmes nodded slowly. I believe we are beginning to glimpse the stagecraft of this affair. Someone, or something, is operating behind a veil of comedy, disguising their movements through jest and misdirection. I handed the notebook back to Holmes. It reads like a log of clandestine meetings. You think Jasper was tracking someone? More than one person, I suspect. And Bernard, poor lad, tried to pick up where he left off. Only he lacked Jasper's subtlety, and paid for it. He turned to Polly. Did Jasper ever mention any names? Only one, she said, after a moment's hesitation. Victor Tolliver. He used to perform here. Illusionist. He vanished a few years ago after a fight with one of the managers. Said he'd been cheated. But Jasper told me once he still saw him in the crowd, laughing too loud, always watching. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Victor Tolliver. Lestrade, who had just rejoined us, pricked up his ears. Now there's a name I know. Disappeared after some unpleasantness with a barmaid at the Silver Serpent Club. No charges filed. Vanished without a trace. Holmes tapped the notebook. He's in here. Twice. Lestrade frowned. Are you saying he's the killer? I'm saying, Holmes replied, that Tolliver may be the thread. He knew Jasper, resented the theater, and disappeared just as this underground jest began. He turned suddenly, speaking with new urgency. Peebles. Does the theater keep records of performers' addresses? Even old ones? Yes, Peebles said. In the manager's ledger. Fetch it. Within minutes, we were thumbing through dog-eared pages in Peebles's office once more. Holmes paused at an entry. Victor Tolliver, 32 Harrow Crescent, Bermondsey. Still in London, then? Holmes murmured. Unless it's a false trail. He folded the page and looked at Lestrade. Will you accompany us, Inspector? Lestrade nodded. I'll have 2 men meet us there. No sense letting this shadow slip through our fingers. We left the theater through the side door as the last of the audience trickled out into the mist. The fog had deepened again, heavy with dampness and the faint scent of soot. It clung to us as we boarded a waiting cab and rattled off toward Bermondsey. Holmes sat rigidly upright, his fingers pressed together beneath his chin. Watson, he said softly. A jest, when honed carefully enough, becomes a weapon. Jasper Meeks tried to wield it against a hidden enemy. Bernard attempted to carry the blade and was struck down. Tonight, we knock at the door of the man who wrote the script. The cab jostled forward, and the gas lamps slipped past like fading spotlights. The city itself seemed to be holding its breath. The ride to Bermondsey was grim and silent. Holmes sat like a statue, eyes shut but mind unmistakably racing. I, seated across from him in the dim interior of the cab, studied his face, the familiar tension of narrowed brows, the stillness of his mouth. It was the look I had come to recognize when the final shape of a puzzle was beginning to emerge, yet still lacked one critical piece. Outside, the fog grew thicker, the street lamps casting pale halos on slick cobblestones. We turned down a row of narrow terraced houses, brick soot-darkened and uniform in their dreariness. A pair of constables waited beneath the gaslight at the corner, their forms emerging from the mist like wraiths. Number 32, Holmes murmured as we disembarked. Note the lack of a name on the door, curtains drawn. No smoke from the chimney, but a faint light glows behind the parlor window. A man hoping not to be noticed, but needing to see out. Lestrade signaled the constables and we approached the door in a tight cluster. Holmes rapped twice with his cane. No answer. He knocked again, louder. A pause. Then a shuffling within. The curtain twitched. The door creaked open a mere inch, revealing a sliver of a pale, drawn face and one suspicious eye. Yes. Holmes smiled faintly. Mr. Tolliver, I presume. My name is Sherlock Holmes. May we come in? The door didn't move. You've got the wrong man. Ah, but you see, I don't believe we do, Holmes said smoothly. I rarely make house calls, Mr. Tolliver, but tonight I thought you might like to discuss a matter of grave importance. Jasper Meeks, Bernard Quilly, and a joke that's gone too far. A silence. The eye blinked once. The door opened another few inches, then all the way. Victor Tolliver had once been a striking man, or so I'd heard. Now he looked like the ghost of himself. Gaunt, pale, eyes sunken with the too sharp brightness of the paranoid. He wore a housecoat that might have been fine once, but now hung loose and threadbare at the cuffs. I didn't kill anyone, he said immediately. If that's what this is about. Holmes stepped over the threshold without invitation. Curious how often innocent men begin with that declaration. But no, Mr. Tolliver, we are here not to accuse, but to understand. Lestrade followed, muttering, You'll forgive me if I reserve judgment. We were ushered into a sparse sitting room. A small coal fire smoldered behind a grate, giving the place a faint warmth. Books were stacked precariously on every available surface. Most were volumes on stagecraft, stage magic, and social psychology. A cracked mirror above the hearth reflected our distorted forms. Holmes's gaze swept the room in one practiced glance. You knew Jasper Meeks, he said. It was not a question. Tolliver slumped into a chair. We worked together. Years ago. He was clever, wittier than he let on. Understood performance as few do. He could make you laugh and wince at the same time. A rare thing. And you parted on poor terms. Tolliver shrugged. It's the theater. Everyone parts on poor terms. But Jasper, he saw things, understood people. And he had a dangerous sense of humor. It was a tool for him. A shield. A sword. Holmes nodded. He was investigating something. A society masquerading as a joke. The Laughing Club. Tolliver's eyes flicked up sharply. That old name again. I warned him not to dig. But he wouldn't stop. You were a member? Tolliver hesitated. Not officially. I was drawn to them, yes. For a time. They're not a club in any formal sense. More a movement. They believe that truth is best hidden in absurdity. That if you make a thing laughable, no one will question it. They told jokes that weren't jokes. Wrote plays that weren't plays. Warnings, Watson. Allegories. Sometimes, instructions. And Jasper had begun to decode them, Holmes said. Yes. Tolliver's voice dropped. He started writing notes. Following people. He said there was a ring of men, performers, critics, theater owners, even aristocrats, who used the comedy circuit as cover. For what, he never said plainly. But it frightened him. Frightened him enough to write the final sketch, Holmes murmured, and send his understudy to deliver it in his place. Tolliver looked stricken. Bernard is dead? Shot through the throat before the final toast, Holmes said coldly. Someone wanted his silence, not his applause. The room fell into silence, broken only by the ticking of a small mantel clock. Do you know who did it? Tolliver asked. Holmes shook his head slowly. Not yet, but we're close. Jasper's notebook makes reference to certain encoded performances, gestures, phrases, even comedic routines laced with signals. One man in particular seems to appear often. A patron. Always in the front 3 rows. Always laughing louder than the rest. You, Mr. Tolliver. Describe someone similar to Miss Weston. Tolliver's hands gripped the arms of his chair. The man with the laugh, he said. Yes, I've seen him. Too often. A man with no joy in his eyes. He rose suddenly and crossed the room. From behind a stack of books, he retrieved a thin folder. I started keeping records myself. After Jasper came to me that last time, I was scared, but I couldn't let it go. Inside were a series of sketches, notes, diagrams of theaters' seating positions. One sheet stood out, a drawing of a face. It was angular, hawkish, with heavy brows and a twisted smile. Beneath it was written, Gigi always row B, always claps 4 times, always watching. Gigi, Lestrade repeated. What is that, initials? Possibly, Holmes said. Or a moniker. Either way, it's our phantom patron. The one Jasper feared. The one Quilly hoped to expose. Holmes turned to Tolliver. Do you remember the last performance you saw him at? Tolliver nodded slowly. 6 weeks ago. The Orpheus Theater. He was seated 3 rows back, center aisle. He laughed too soon. Before the punchline. An insider, Holmes said quietly. One who already knew the joke. There was a knock at the door, one of Lestrade's constables. Begging your pardon, sir. There's been a development. From the theater. Lestrade's eyes narrowed. What sort of development? A stagehand cleaning out the orchestra pit found something hidden behind the bass drum. A small brass figure. Holmes's eyes flashed. The totem. The what? A clown's head, I explained. Jasper's personal item. It disappeared from his dressing room after his death. Holmes was already reaching for his coat. Gentlemen, it appears the final act is upon us. Someone feared what Jasper hid in that figurine, and now, having failed to stop the message, they may return for the relic itself. He turned to Tolliver. You will remain here under police protection. You're a valuable witness and a target. Tolliver nodded, pale but resolute. Outside, the fog rolled back like a curtain, revealing the gaslit streets ahead. Holmes stepped into the cab, his voice low and grim. This is no longer merely a theater's affair, Watson. We are dealing with a society that masks its secrets in laughter and silences those who dare to explain the joke. As the cab turned toward the Harlequin and Gaslight, Holmes leaned close. Tonight, he said, we must listen for the man who laughs before the punchline. By the time we arrived back at the Harlequin and Gaslight, the fog had begun to lift in ragged layers, torn open by the yellow lamplight and the restless tread of constables on duty. The theater, once bustling with mirth and music, now stood under a hush as grave as any mortuary's. Only a single carriage remained out front. Lestrade's men waiting. The door to the orchestra pit had been left ajar. Holmes descended the steps without hesitation. I followed, my footsteps echoing on the worn wood of the backstage corridor. The pit smelled of sawdust and brass polish, and the instruments stood stacked and shrouded like mourners after a wake. 2 constables flanked a plain wooden crate, pried open to reveal its contents. A cloth bundle resting on coiled ropes and cracked sheet music. One of the men stepped forward, his hands gloved. We found it wedged behind the bass drum, just as described. Thought it might have been part of the act. But Mr. Peebles confirmed it belonged to the deceased. He handed the bundle to Holmes, who unwrapped it with care. Inside was a small brass figurine 2 inches tall, perhaps less. A clown's head, grotesquely sculpted, its grin wide and glinting, with one eye larger than the other and its mouth open in what might have been either laughter or a scream. Holmes turned it over slowly in the lamplight. Beautiful craftsmanship. A slight click, then the base rotated and slid open. Inside the head was a tightly rolled slip of parchment. Holmes drew it out and unrolled it with reverence. The writing was unmistakably Jasper Meeks's, broad, theatrical strokes, the kind favored by performers whose notes were often read in low light. I peered over his shoulder and read aloud in a murmur. To those who laugh without listening, the man who sits beneath the central lamp has rewritten the jest. He hides the truth in routine. For claps. A signature habit. For claps.
No smile.
An unnatural performance of approval. And this, ask why the punch never punches. That's the core of it. Punch? I repeated. As in Punch and Judy? Exactly. The archetypal violent clown, known for his outrageous assaults and absurd brutality. If Punch no longer punches, then something fundamental has changed. A joke withheld is, in this context, a truth suppressed. Lestrade gave a long-suffering sigh. You mean something's being hidden, still? I do, Holmes said. And now we know where to look. In the audience. Specifically, in the center row seating near the lighting gantry, what the stagehands call the glow seat. He turned to the constables. I need the house lights on and the audience section cleared, save for staff. No one else enters without my say-so. Within 20 minutes, Holmes and I stood alone in the main hall. The velvet seats, once crowded with cheerful patrons, now sat mute beneath the glare of house lights. Holmes made his way down to the third row center aisle and halted at a particular seat. Worn more than the others, its padding frayed at the armrest. This is the place, he murmured. 3 rows back. Center. Direct view of the stage. Tolliver saw the man here 6 weeks ago. Jasper saw him more recently. He knelt and examined the floor beneath the seat. I joined him, heart thudding, as he retrieved a small metal screw from the carpet pile and held it up. Threaded brass. Theater standard. But this... He ran a gloved fingertip across the wood just beneath the seat. A cut. Circular. Someone fastened something here. Regularly. A recording device? I asked. Possibly. Or a signaling instrument. But here's the true prize. He reached into the narrow slit of upholstery along the seat's base and retrieved a folded piece of paper, half-yellowed and stained with old grease. Holmes unfolded it carefully. Written in ink, barely legible. Tonight they test the final gag. Laughter is silence to the right ears. Remove Jasper before Act 3. My breath caught. This is an instruction, I said. Indeed, Holmes replied grimly. Not a joke, not a note, but a command. Whoever sat here was the handler. Jasper's death was a stage direction. At that moment, the house door opened and Peebles entered. His steps hurried. You'd best come quickly, he said. There's someone asking after Jasper's dressing room. A man claiming to be from the Office of Civic Repertory. But I checked. There's no such bureau. Holmes's eyes sharpened. Is he alone? Yes, but he's agitated. Said he had papers to collect. Holmes snapped to action. Show me. We followed Peebles back through the wings and into the hall behind the dressing rooms. A tall man in a brown overcoat stood just outside Jasper's door, a satchel in hand. His face was thin, severe, and he turned quickly when he saw us. For a moment, I saw the faintest flicker of alarm behind his eyes. Good evening, Holmes said smoothly. May I see your credentials? The man straightened. Inspector Harrow, Civic Repertory Office. I've clearance. You don't? Holmes interrupted, stepping closer. There is no such office and no inspector with that name listed by the Commissioner of Theaters. But more to the point, your lapel is stitched with thread from a harlequin costume. And your gloves smell of gunpowder. The man moved suddenly, shoving Peebles aside and bolting down the corridor. Holmes was after him in an instant. I followed as fast as I could, my footsteps echoing against the walls. The man darted through the backstage maze, down the orchestra pit steps, and across the empty stalls. Holmes pursued like a hound on the scent. At last, cornered against the curtain rigging, the man spun around, his hand slipping into his coat. But Lestrade was already there, revolver drawn. I wouldn't, he said coldly. The man froze. Holmes stepped forward, breath sharp from the run. GG, he said. The man with no smile, the susp. CT's mouth twitched. Whether from defiance or shame, I couldn't tell. Jasper outed you in performance, Holmes went on. He tailored his act to your habits. You clapped too soon. You watched the crowd more than the show. And Bernard, poor fool, followed the same path, until you silenced him. Lestrade cuffed the man as Holmes retrieved the satchel. Inside were dozens of notes, all written in a clipped hand. Instructions, names, performers marked for interruption. Each coded as a theatrical cue. Holmes turned to me, grave and triumphant. It was all a performance, Watson, but not for applause. This was orchestration, of silence, of sabotage, of murder. and the curtain at last had come down. Backstage was a flurry of quiet astonishment. Word of the man's arrest spread quickly through the theater staff, but Holmes insisted that the details remain restricted to only those essential to the investigation. Peebles, pale and shaking but obedient, ordered the theater cleared entirely, locking the main doors while Lestrade escorted the suspect to a waiting carriage under guard. Holmes stood in the center of the empty stage, arms folded, gazing into the vacant house as though expecting the shadows themselves to applaud. I approached cautiously. "So that man do we know his name?" Holmes gave a small, bitter smile. "Gregory Gale. An assumed name, I believe. But it matches notes in both Jasper's and Tolliver's documents. The initials were correct. He was a theatrical agent once, minor player in the provincial circuits, before vanishing from public records some 10 years ago. And since then, operating behind the curtain, quite literally, a handler, a censor in disguise. I believe he's part of an organization that has been shaping performances in subtle ways, removing voices, altering scripts, guiding the direction of theatrical narratives. Why? I asked. Why manipulate comedy acts and variety shows? What possible purpose? Control, Holmes interrupted. Through suggestion. Laughter is not just distraction, it is persuasion. Plant the right line, the right gesture, the right silence, and you begin to shape public sentiment. Jasper discovered this. And more than that, he realized who was controlling the strings. That's what made him dangerous. He turned to me then, his expression grave. I have often told you, Watson, that the stage and the crime scene are closer than many believe. Both rely on illusion, timing, misdirection. And in this case, the murderer used all three. Only his audience was the City of London. Before I could respond, Peebles returned, now joined by Polly Weston. She looked exhausted, her eyes red but alert. "Mr. Holmes," she said softly, "there's something you should see. I didn't think much of it at first, but now—" She handed him a folded sheet of paper, dog-eared and smudged with rouge and powder. It was tucked behind the mirror in Jasper's dressing room. I found it while clearing away his things. Holmes unfolded it, and his eyes narrowed as he read. "It's a monologue," he murmured. "A final piece, possibly intended as part of a show. Or no, wait, look here. It's marked for the understudy. This was meant for Bernard." He read aloud, slowly and with deliberate care. "They told me jokes were harmless, that laughter could heal. But what if the laugh buries truth like a shroud? What if the ones who laugh loudest are afraid of silence?" Holmes lowered the page. Jasper was not just sending warnings. He was planning to expose Gale and whoever backed him, using the very medium they tried to corrupt, performance. This was not just subversion, it was counter-narrative. Lestrade, returning from the curb, joined us again with a triumphant huff. The man's not talking, of course, but he had a ticket stub in his coat pocket from 2 nights ago. Same seat, center row. He caught sight of the monologue in Holmes's hand. "What's that?" "A eulogy," Holmes said quietly, "delivered in silence. But it speaks volumes." He paced a little, the weight of the case pressing into his stride now that the adrenaline of pursuit had faded. "The more I consider it, the more I believe Jasper knew he would not survive to deliver this himself. That's why he gave the message to Bernard. And when Bernard perished, he left the remainder of the message hidden behind a clown's grin. There's symbolism in that, Watson, masking the truth with comedy." Polly's voice, soft and cracking slightly, broke the hush. "Then it's over?" Holmes looked at her. "The performance is over, but the audience remains, and they may not know what they've seen." He stepped forward. "Miss Weston, may I ask, what will you do now?" She looked at the stage, at the wings where Jasper had last stood. "I don't know. I suppose I'll go back to the chorus. Unless they close us down." "You could perform," Holmes said, surprising us both. "Deliver Jasper's monologue. Frame it as a tribute if you wish. Let the city hear his voice one last time." She blinked. "You think they'd let me?" "I think," Holmes replied, that stories find their way through strange doors, and sometimes the best place for the truth is under a spotlight. She gave a faint, tearful smile. Then I'll try. Later that night, back at Baker Street, the fire crackled merrily while Holmes sat, legs crossed, in his armchair. He had refused supper but accepted a glass of Burgundy, which now sat untouched on the side table beside him. He stared into the hearth, pipe forgotten in his fingers. "The Laughing Club, Watson," he said at last. "It was more than I suspected. Not a gathering of eccentrics, but a front. An intelligence arm operating in performance spaces, hiding directives in comedy, code in costume. Jasper cracked the cipher, and it killed him. And the others?" I asked. "Gale can't have acted alone. No, there will be more. But the curtain has lifted, and with it, the illusion weakens." He turned to me with a rare trace of weariness. "I confess, Watson, there is something unsettling about this case, not because of its complexity but because of its intent. I am accustomed to killers who act from passion, or greed, or vengeance. But this was orchestration for its own sake. A deliberate blurring of performance and reality. Do you think the theater is still compromised?" Holmes shook his head. "Not now. We've exposed the rot. But it will return in other forms. It always does. And when it does, it may not be hidden in laughter." I watched the firelight dance across the bookshelves. The silence in the room felt unusually full. Not peaceful but heavy, meaningful. The quiet after a final bow. "You were right, Holmes," I said. "It wasn't just a murder. It was a message." He gave a wan smile. "Indeed, Watson. And I dare say, this time we got the joke." A knock interrupted us. Mrs. Hudson, carrying a small envelope. "Delivered just now," she said. "No return address." Holmes took it, opened it slowly. Inside was a theater program. The Harlequin and Gaslight's next week's performance. On the back, scrawled in hurried pen, "The audience changes, but the script remains. They will laugh again soon." Holmes stared at it a long moment before folding it and placing it into the fire. The flame caught quickly. The message curled black and vanished.
Non encore, Holmes muttered.
Not this time. And so the final jest burned in silence. The following days passed in a strange hush, as though the city itself had absorbed the theater's silence. News of the murder at the Harlequin and Gaslight made modest headlines, framed as a tragic onstage accident. A convenient explanation, perhaps gently encouraged by Lestrade and the Yard to prevent hysteria. No mention was made of coded messages or secret societies. To the public, it was a case of theatrical misfortune. But Holmes, as always, was not satisfied by appearances. He spent the better part of 3 days in his dressing gown, poring over newspapers, performance registers, and annotated copies of the London Stage Almanac. Maps of various theaters across the city were pinned across our sitting room walls. Red ink circled certain venues. At least one map bore X marks over individual box seats. He moved like a man still mid-pursuit, though our quarry had been captured. "Holmes," I asked finally, late on the third afternoon, "you've already exposed the man behind the murders. You've untangled Jasper's message and ensured his monologue will be heard. What remains?" Holmes did not look up from the theater roster. "What remains, Watson, is the chorus." I blinked. The chorus? Indeed. In any great performance, we spend our time watching the lead, but it is the chorus that sets the rhythm, the context, the subtle undertone of meaning. You see, Gale was not working alone. I believe others still remain. Agents, watchers, embedded in the backdrop of the theater world, shaping the performance from beneath the rafters. You mean to suggest there are still operatives, part of this so-called laughing club? He nodded, tapping a column on one of the rosters. Their attendance patterns form a pattern too precise to be accidental. They appear only at performances that meet certain criteria. Unscripted monologues, political satire, or acts featuring audience interaction. These are the moments where improvisation is most dangerous, where truth might slip out under the guise of jest. That is when they appear. He moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. I believe we have only interrupted the overture, Watson. The opera is still underway. Before I could reply, a knock came at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered with a small white envelope. For you, Mr. Holmes. A young woman delivered it by hand. No name. Holmes took it, turned it over in his long fingers, and opened it with a silver blade. Inside was a single folded note and a torn scrap of theater poster. The note read, "The second mask falls tonight. Come alone. Box 5, Orpheus Theater. Curtain at 8. Holmes looked at the scrap. It bore the name of the Orpheus Theater and part of a title. The Laughing Prince Returns. He turned the paper toward me. What do you make of it, Watson? I studied the words. A trap, perhaps. But if so, it is an oddly theatrical one. I leaned forward. You won't actually go alone? Certainly not. I'll go apparently alone. You and Lestrade will take up concealed positions. We will treat this as we would any play. Observe, interpret, and act when the curtain demands it. That evening, we arrived separately at the Orpheus Theater. Holmes, clad in his most unremarkable attire, gray frock coat, plain tie, bowler hat, slipped inside at precisely 7:55. I followed 10 minutes later, ticket in hand, and was ushered to a side box from which I had a clear view of Holmes's assigned seat. Box 5. The theater was nearly full. The crowd buzzed with polite anticipation, a typical London audience of mixed class. City clerks beside minor gentry, students beside ladies in fine gloves. But as I scanned the house, I began to notice a strangeness beneath the surface. A man in row C laughed before each joke had been delivered. A woman in the upper gallery sat rigidly upright, never once clapping, though she smiled at every cue. Another near Holmes's box kept checking his pocket watch at precise intervals.
Agents, y realiza.
Not one or two, but several. A network hidden in plain sight. The play began. It was ostensibly a farce, an over-the-top comedy set in a fictional kingdom where a mad prince staged elaborate performances to distract from his tyranny. The jokes were broad, the satire heavy-handed. But then came the moment that made Holmes sit forward. A scene with no dialogue. The prince, alone on stage, moved through a mimed pantomime, placing masks upon audience members, each one followed by a strange, stylized gesture. A wave, a wink, a hand over the mouth. It was ritual, not comedy. A performance within the performance. I shifted in my seat. Holmes, I saw, was still, alert. Then the house lights dimmed unexpectedly, just for a moment. And in that silence, a figure slipped into box 5 behind Holmes. He did not turn, but I saw his hand tighten on the cane beside him. The figure, dressed like an usher, but too tall, too still, leaned forward. Even from my vantage point, I saw him place a folded paper on the ledge in front of Holmes and vanish again into the darkness. The lights came up. The play resumed. Holmes opened the paper and read it. Then, deliberately, he rose and left. I followed as swiftly as I dared, signaling to Lestrade across the gallery. Within moments we were outside, converging behind the theater as Holmes emerged from a side exit. He handed me the note without speaking. He never laughed. Look for the man who flinches. The jest ends where it began. Asterisk. Holmes looked up, his breath curling in the night air. This confirms it. What does? The presence of a deeper director, someone watching even Gale, a man not amused by comedy, who flinches at laughter, who operates from the shadows. Lestrade arrived, breathless. Did you get him? No, Holmes said, but I got the clue. The final performance is not tonight. It is tomorrow. Where? I asked. Holmes turned the note over. On the back, a faint imprint of ink showed a date and time. Rehearsal room B, Harlequin and Gaslight, noon. The origin of the jest, Holmes said quietly. It ends where it began. He looked at us both. Tomorrow we unmask the playwright. Morning came gray and damp, a typical London drizzle clinging to the air as if reluctant to let the city breathe freely. Holmes rose early, an unusual occurrence unless a case demanded it, and was already dressed in his most severe attire. Black frock coat, narrow tie, and gloves. By the time I joined him in the sitting room, he had taken no breakfast and spoke little. His violin lay untouched by the window, as though even that refuge of thought was unnecessary now. The time for contemplation had passed. The final movement was upon us. We departed for the Harlequin and Gaslight just after 10, arriving early to ensure the place was empty. Lestrade met us outside the stage door, flanked by 2 plainclothes men. "Building sealed since last night," he reported. "No one in or out. We've kept the main entrance shuttered, per your instructions." "Excellent," Holmes said. "Now, rehearsal room B." Peebles appeared soon after, startled to see us again so soon but offering his keys without protest. "There's almost nothing in that room anymore," he muttered. "We haven't used it since the spring. Too damp. Ceiling leaks." Perfect, I thought grimly. The very kind of neglected corner one might choose for quiet schemes. Peebles led us through a narrow corridor backstage and down a small staircase into a low-ceilinged annex. Rehearsal room B was more cellar than room. A single gas lamp flickered from a rusted fixture, and the wooden floor bore dark stains that might have once been paint but now resembled old blood. A warped upright piano stood against the far wall, its lid closed and keys yellowed with age. Folding chairs leaned like drunks against the peeling plaster. Holmes entered first, scanned the room, then gestured to Lestrade and the others. "Positions. No one speaks unless I do. The man who arrives will expect silence, and may be armed." We took our places. Lestrade behind the piano, one constable beside the door, another near a broken wardrobe that offered concealment. I stood behind a tall prop mirror set along the side wall, where I could observe Holmes and the entrance with minimal exposure. Holmes moved a single chair to the center of the room and sat with the folded note from box 5 resting in his lap. He didn't so much wait as prepare. A calm intensity radiating from him, as though his every cell were focused on the upcoming moment. The minutes ticked by. At 11:58, we heard footsteps echoing from the corridor. Not hurried, not stealthy, a measured tread, the walk of a man confident he belonged wherever he went. The door opened. The figure who entered was not tall, not broad, not in any way remarkable. Medium height, middle-aged, clean-shaven, and dressed in a brown overcoat. His hair was graying but neatly parted, his boots clean. He held a hat in one hand and a slim valise in the other. He paused when he saw Holmes but did not appear surprised. "Mr. Holmes," he said quietly. Holmes inclined his head. "You're punctual. I value precision." The man stepped forward, set his hat on the piano, and opened the valise. From it he removed a stack of folded papers and a single black-bound book, which he placed on the floor between them. Then he looked Holmes directly in the eye. "My name," he said, "is Julian Slate. I am, or was, the editor of the Underground Curtain." I saw Holmes's expression shift subtly. That name familiar. Then I remembered. A satirical periodical banned years ago for veiled attacks on the aristocracy and the crown. Clever, sharp, and always anonymous. "I see," Holmes said. "So you were the author. Not merely the stagehand, but the playwright." Slate inclined his head. "Not the only one. But yes, one of the founders. When the Underground Curtain was outlawed, we retreated to the stage. Laughter is a passport, Mr. Holmes. Passes through walls. We began placing pieces in performances, lines, glances, reversals of logic. Theaters became our pages. Audiences our readers. "And your agents?" Holmes asked. "Gale, for instance?" Slate's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Some joined willingly. Some were coerced. Some never knew they were part of it. The Laughing Club was never a club. It was a method." He gestured toward the book on the floor. "That contains the code book. Phrases, gestures, punchlines, each tied to a different message. A movement of the hand might signal a target. A misdelivered line, an order to withdraw. It was beautiful once." "And Jasper Meeks?" Holmes said, his voice still level. He discovered too much? He created too much, Slate said quietly. Jasper was never meant to see the full pattern. He was an artist. He began embedding truths into his own acts, truths we never sanctioned. He knew the audience too well. He learned to send messages we couldn't trace. That terrified some among us. And so they killed him? Slate's voice dropped. I didn't give the order. But yes, someone in our circle did. Gale was the blade, not the mind. Holmes leaned back slightly, studying the man. And why come now? Why return to the scene of your own undoing? Because it has gone too far, Slate replied. What began as satire has become censorship. We told ourselves we were preserving freedom, smuggling truths into farce. But over time, we began suppressing those who didn't follow the rhythm. Jasper's death wasn't the final jest. It was the first tragedy. He stepped back and placed his hands behind his head. I'm done, Mr. Holmes. I have brought you everything I have. Names, meetings, play scripts, even the rotation schedule for the agents seated in audience rows. There's enough here to unpick every string we ever pulled. Holmes nodded toward Lestrade, who emerged from behind the piano with his revolver drawn. The constables stepped forward to cuff Slate, who offered no resistance. As they led him away, he turned to Holmes one last time. I believed in the power of performance. But we forgot the audience is real. When they were gone, Holmes stooped and picked up the black book. He leafed through it slowly, silently. Each page was a cipher, a symbol paired with a phrase, a gesture with a meaning. Pages and pages of it, a secret language of laughter. He handed it to me. We were never meant to see this, Watson, and yet here it is. I looked down at the book, feeling the weight of it in my hands. You've ended them, Holmes, I said. The Laughing Club, the performers behind the performance. Holmes stared at the empty chair in the center of the room.
No.
I have only revealed them. The club itself was just a name. The idea behind it, the use of art as control, of humor as camouflage that cannot be arrested. That, I fear, will return in some other form. He turned to me. But Jasper's death has meaning now. The jest is no longer hollow. And the curtain, at least for now, has fallen on the darkest players. We left the room together, and the gaslight flickered out behind us. Above, on the main stage, Polly Weston was rehearsing her lines. I heard her voice echo faintly through the rafters. But what if the ones who laugh loudest are afraid of silence? The line hung in the air like a question London might never answer. And outside, the fog began to clear. The performance was set for that evening, a special engagement in memory of Jasper Meeks. Posters went up hastily across Clerkenwell and Holborn. One night only. A tribute to Jasper, the jolly words unspoken, truths revealed. It drew a mixed crowd, part curiosity, part loyalty. Some came because they had adored Meeks and mourned his loss. Others had heard whispers, vague and thrilling, about coded laughter and secret societies. But most came, as they always do, for the promise of entertainment, unaware that tonight's show would be unlike any they had ever seen. Holmes and I arrived before sunset, greeted by a changed atmosphere at the Harlequin and Gaslight. There was an air of tension, yes, but also reverence. The theater, now cleared of its shadows, felt suddenly more dignified, as though acknowledging its own role in events and preparing to atone. Polly Weston stood on the stage in full costume. Not garish satin or feathers, but a simple gray dress and dark tights. Her face was bare, her eyes determined. She rehearsed alone under the glow of a single footlight, the house empty, the silence respectful. Holmes watched from the aisle, arms folded, expression unreadable. She's taken it seriously, I said, stepping beside him. She understands, he replied softly. The greatest honor we can give the dead is to speak for them. Polly stopped, noticing us. She stepped to the edge of the stage. It's ready, she said. I've learned every word of Jasper's monologue. I won't add a thing. Holmes nodded. Good. Say it exactly as written. Don't try to soften the truth. It must be heard, or all this will have been for naught. She gave a faint smile. You almost sound theatrical yourself. He gave a rare smile in return. Only in tragedy. The theater filled steadily as twilight deepened. The footmen wore black armbands. Peebles took the stage briefly to thank the audience for attending and to explain that tonight's performance would be both a tribute and a closing act for Jasper Meeks and, as he phrased it, for those who speak from behind the mask. Then the curtain rose, not with fanfare, but with silence. Polly stepped into the spotlight. No music.
No scenery.
Just her alone on the bare boards. When she began to speak, the audience leaned forward almost as one. They told me jokes were harmless, that laughter could heal. But what if the laugh buries truth like a shroud? What if the ones who laugh loudest are afraid of silence? Her voice was clear, unbroken. She had found strength in stillness. Holmes and I sat in the third row, surrounded by strangers but united in attention. I could feel the tension in the room, the way listeners shifted not from boredom but discomfort, as if the words were undoing some internal knot they didn't know they carried. I was a fool who danced in motley while murder wrote the script. I juggled sorrow for their amusement but dropped the truth beneath the boards. Each stanza, each line, felt more potent than the last. Not because it accused, but because it revealed. This was not merely an elegy. It was an unveiling. Jasper had written the monologue not as performance, but as testimony. The man who never laughed hid in the second row. For claps, no smile. A silent cue, and the curtain fell on me. Polly paused there, just for a heartbeat, letting the line echo. Someone in the back gasped quietly. I saw a woman press a hand to her mouth. Holmes remained perfectly still, eyes fixed not on Polly, but on the crowd. Watching.
The finalist
Was no joke, but a mirror. And who among us dares look? And with that, she bowed once, simply, and stepped back into the shadows. The curtain did not fall. Instead, the house lights rose slowly, and for a long, sacred moment, no one moved. Then the applause began, not raucous but rising, wave after wave.
No whistles.
No calls for encore, just a long, steady acknowledgement. Holmes stood. He turned to me.
Come, Watson.
We exited quietly before the audience had finished applauding. Outside, the fog had returned, faint and soft, like gauze over a healing wound. The city glowed gently beneath gas lamps, not menacing tonight, but somehow humbled. We walked in silence down the avenue. It worked, I said finally. It did, Holmes agreed. Do you believe they understood it? Enough of them, he replied. And that is all truth requires. One listener. We paused on the corner, where the glow of the theater still hovered behind us. And what of the others? I asked. Gale is in custody. Slate will testify. But you said yourself, the idea persists. Holmes turned, his coat flaring slightly in the breeze. It does, and it always will. Deception is as old as storytelling. But so is revelation. There will always be those who turn laughter into camouflage. But there will also be fools who turn masks into mirrors. He looked up at the night sky. The clouds had parted, just a little, and one pale star blinked above the rooftops. I find comfort in that, Watson. I smiled. You, comforted? A rare moment. I'm a loud one, he said. We walked a little farther, then parted at the corner of Baker Street and Chapel. Until tomorrow, Holmes said. Until tomorrow, I echoed. And he vanished into the fog, as quiet as a footnote, as deliberate as a final bow. The city resumed its breathing. The laughter would return as it must. But now, somewhere beneath it, there was an echo of a different sound. Words once silenced, now spoken. The jest was over, and the truth remained. It was 3 days after the tribute performance when Holmes received a visit from Inspector Lestrade. The inspector entered our Baker Street rooms with an expression equal parts satisfaction and fatigue, clutching a dossier so thick it resembled a ledger. Well, it's finished, he said, dropping the file onto the table with a thump. Charges filed. Warrants issued. We've arrested 5 more operatives, 3 from the Theatrical Booking Guild, 1 from the Ministry of Public Morality, and, would you believe it, a peer of the realm who funded their operations through a shadow trust. Holmes raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The book Slate gave us, your black ledger, was invaluable, Lestrade continued. Every name, every cue, a whole code of silence mapped out like stage directions. Holmes gave a faint nod. Truth, when disguised as fiction, often leaves a more vivid trail. Lestrade hesitated. We've also uncovered something else. There was a list of targets, people they deemed too dangerous to let speak unchecked. Writers, satirists, performers. Jasper Meeks was near the top. And Bernard Quilly? A casualty by association. He wasn't on the list. Just in the wrong place, too loyal to the wrong man. Lestrade cleared his throat. We're recommending full exoneration for both. Posthumous, of course. The Crown will issue an official statement. Holmes's gaze drifted to the fireplace. That will mean little to the dead, but perhaps something to those who watched them die. Lestrade looked uncomfortable but pressed on. And Slate? In custody, he replied, but offering full cooperation. Claims he intends to testify, publish everything, under his real name this time. We'll see. The inspector gathered his coat, looking around the sitting room with a tired sigh. Holmes, I don't mind telling you. This one rattled the yard. It wasn't just murder. It was theater. Precisely, Holmes said. And you cannot investigate a performance by watching only the actors. You must look to the director, the script, the lights. The quietest player often gives the loudest cue. When Lestrade had gone, I turned to Holmes. He was staring at Jasper's monologue, framed and resting on the mantel. A single line stood out, underlined in ink. What if the laugh buries truth like a shroud? I asked the question that had lingered since the curtain had fallen. Was this case ever really about justice, Holmes? Or was it something deeper? He took a moment before replying. Justice, Watson, is a performance like any other. What matters is whether the audience leaves with their eyes opened or shut. He stood and walked to the window, drawing back the curtain. Below, the city pulsed with the life of another fog-draped evening. Cab wheels, hawkers' cries, distant laughter from a tavern. Jasper Meeks understood something few men grasp, Holmes said softly. That laughter can be both sword and shield. That some jokes are meant to hide, and others to reveal. And that in a world ruled by illusion, truth must sometimes wear grease paint. I stood beside him in silence, watching London breathe. He turned from the window and reached for his violin. As he drew the bow across the strings, the notes were slow, contemplative, neither sad nor joyous, just precise, measured, like the case itself. And though the mystery had ended, its echo would linger, tucked between curtain folds and dressing room mirrors, waiting for some other actor to step into the light and risk speaking truth disguised in jest. That night, as I wrote the final entry in my journal, I titled it, The Final Jest of the Dying Clown, a Case of Masks and Meaning, and beneath it, I added Holmes's own words. There is no truth too serious to laugh at, but there is also no laughter too harmless to fear.